Hello and welcome to the NCCCA's last Our Changing Climate Series presentation of 2020. Before we get started, I'd like us to raise our glasses in a triple toast, and feel free to turn on your audio for this part. First of all, to all of our local volunteers who have made this year's events possible, you know who you are. Skol. Secondly, to tonight's guests, Lucero and Matt of San Diego CoastKeeper, for taking the deep dive into protecting the fishable, swimmable, and drinkable waters of San Diego County. Salute.
Woohoo!
And finally, to the promise of all of us pushing even harder on every front in 2021 to restore and protect our democracy, our biosphere, and Earth's precious species. L'chaim. My name is Merrill Leeds, and I'm a volunteer with the North County Climate Change Alliance. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, the NCCCA is a local San Diego-based nonprofit dedicated to raising climate awareness and bringing about action through education, collaboration, and mobilization. Mark your calendars for 2020's final NCCCA monthly networking round robin on Saturday, November 21st at 10 a.m. Pacific Time. Please visit our website, nccalliance.org, to register or click the registration link included in tonight's chat. Incidentally, if you are finding yourselves in need of a year-end tax write-off or would simply like to express thanks to us for hosting these terrific events, our website's homepage includes a convenient donate button. I would now like to turn things over to Carl Aldinger, NCCCA's president.
Thanks, Merrill. Everybody, thank you for tuning in tonight. We really appreciate everyone coming and attending these things. I know that we've got a pretty regular group of folks, and then we always pick up some new folks, and sometimes you can't make it, but we really appreciate your continued attention to all of these important issues. I first started to work with Matt a few months ago with some of the work that I'm doing with climate here in the county. And I was a little bit surprised at exactly the kind of work that he was doing. I wasn't sure that that's what CoastKeeper was about. And so I thought it would be a really nice idea to have Matt and Lucero come and talk with us about the work that they're doing, and really open up some new interesting facets of water that you probably hadn't thought about before, how it relates to climate and the kind of gains and real successes that we are just on the cusp of if everyone becomes aware of it and can help these two push their work forward, because they are doing some really great work here in the county, but they need our help. So I'm going to let Matt and Lucero introduce themselves because they know a lot better about what they do than I do. So with that, please go ahead and introduce yourselves, Matt and Lucero.
Thanks, Carl. I'd like to think I know a little bit more about me than you do, but I'm not quite sure of that. But thanks anyway, and thank you for your time and giving us this opportunity tonight to talk with you and discuss some of the work we're doing, and really appreciate the work that you're all doing. I'll just go real quick first before we dive into our presentation. My name is Matt O'Malley. I'm the Executive Director and Managing Attorney for San Diego CoastKeeper. I'll talk a little bit more about CoastKeeper if you don't know who we are, but I've been with CoastKeeper next month, it'll be about 7 years. And probably for the better part, about 20 years, I've been in environmental policy and law work. My background's a lawyer. Yeah, I really appreciate the time. And Lucero, do you want to kind of jump in?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. My name is Lucero Sanchez. I am the Community Policy Coordinator for San Diego CoastKeeper, and I'm a lot newer. I am 2 months old into the organization, and I love the work that we're doing, and hopefully we'll be on as long as Matt at some point. But really, I help out with policy and advocacy, and that's really all you really need to know about me right now, but we should get into it.
Yeah, thanks for that. So we're going to kind of do a presentation, of course, kind of walk this, and actually Lucero and I will jump back and forth a little bit, and I know there's plenty of room for conversation and discussion and questions at the end. So I'm going to do a share screen. Just get that ready to go. So you all should be able to see that now, yes? Okay, good. Well, we've done the introductions. I kind of want to jump into the first slide is this. It's just a little bit about who we are. So this year was supposed to be our big 25th anniversary blowout. We were founded in 1995. We were going to do all kinds of community celebrations. Of course, COVID sort of cut that short, but we still turned 25 nonetheless. And so CoastKeeper was founded as San Diego Baykeeper, really dealing with issues around pollution and pollution impacts around the Bay. At that time, working on both independently and groups like Environmental Health Coalition. But we've been around, and our mission really is to protect and restore the region's waters. A little bit of background, we started mostly focusing on water quality, but as the vision of our future changed and as climate change became much more apparent, and the nexus of water quality, water supply, and climate change became apparent, we really morphed into an organization that addresses all of those things. And what we do is we use a multi-pronged or multifaceted approach to do that. So that includes education. So we have staff that are out in the communities doing water and climate science curriculum, teaching teachers, teaching students. We do engagement and outreach, even things like this, but we do things from beach cleanups to canyon cleanups to park cleanups. We do restoration projects. We have a heavy science component. We're firm believers in science and that all the decisions that we advocate for should be driven by sound policy and law, which then brings us to the advocacy side. We also have legal staff, myself and another staff attorney, that does everything wonky into diving into permits or challenging permits, doing enforcement of the Clean Water Act, to really trying to change legislation or policy in a direction that looks at the nexus of climate, water, and community together. So that's kind of our background. So I'll just ask you indulge us as we walk through some of this. Some of this is some real base level stuff and we dive into the weeds, but I think it's good to kind of start up on the top. So San Diego CoastKeeper, we really take a watershed approach. Our name is a little misnomer because it tends to say that we focus most of our work on the coast, when in actuality, because we understand the impacts along the coast and our communities are really throughout our watersheds, we really are engaged in the entire watershed. So most of the work we do is actually inland because it impacts our communities and our coast. And so what a watershed is essentially, the area of land that drains all the streams and rainfall into a common outlet, which eventually become our lagoons, our streams, and then the ocean. And because we understand also watersheds and systems don't follow jurisdictional lines, a city line or county line, we understand that we have to navigate these things all within one, right? And so San Diego County, because our jurisdiction is throughout the counties from the border of Mexico up to the top of Camp Pendleton, we operate in 11 watersheds. And these watersheds are kind of depicted here, and they all drain from upland, so really where our mountains and we're kind of the more pristine environment, down through the urban watershed and into the places where we heavily recreate in the water. So I'll give a little bit about I just took this as a Rose Creek watershed. The reason we post this up here is because I want to talk a little bit about what a watershed means. And Rose Creek is for an urbanized watershed. I realize this is not North County, but it's one example. We have North County stuff that we're going to talk about in a bit. But it's a good example of a watershed in San Diego that you see really the only place that hasn't been developed either is a military area. We have plenty of those. It is the areas that really are on too steep of slopes to be able to develop. But in many places, we've developed out to the maximum extent that we've been able to do. And with this, we bring impervious surfaces. So these are surfaces that no longer are natural, so it could be concrete, it could be things like that, roofing, so that no longer are able to actually infiltrate into the ground. And we're talking about rainwater, we're talking about particularly stormwater here that falls from the sky, but normally would be able to saturate into the ground through part of the natural cycle. We're going to talk a lot about man-made versus natural cycle, right? So again, this is the Rose Creek watershed that we talk about. So through some of this impervious development, right, we've basically changed the natural dynamic and structure of what San Diego would look like. So this on the left is just a little schematic that says, hey, before we developed out, right, we had a lot of evapotranspiration when it would rain, so water would go to the sky or would infiltrate into the ground, but not much of it would really run off in a surface fashion. And what we see is as we begin to develop out, there's much more of it that runs off. And then on the right, what we're showing is just that the flow rate also is quicker. So whereas normal would be natural attenuation of rainfall, eventually either into the ground and subsurface into a creek bed or stream or river, right now we're actually going to have a lot more flooding because we're accelerating that flow, right? It's happening a lot quicker. And so what we see there was sort of the I'll go back to this. It's sort of the impervious nature of our built development. On top of that, this is just a diagram that shows that we have, unlike many parts of the country, San Diego is kind of unique. If you go to the East Coast or even some place in the Midwest or even Northwest, they have one single combined water infrastructure. So when it rains or when you flush the toilet, it would go to the same treatment plant. They called it a combined sewer system. So stormwater and sewage water goes to the same place and it gets treated. San Diego, because of development patterns, it developed fairly late, post-war boom. It does not have a combined system like that. So we actually have, what you're seeing here in yellow is the wastewater system. So sink, shower, things like that go to a treatment plant. We'll talk about that in a bit. But the blue is the stormwater. So anytime it rains or there's excessive runoff from irrigation or whatever, actually goes into the blue system and goes untreated into our waterways or canyons or streams and otherwise. And so that's really kind of what we're talking about, like this. And the diagram on the left really just shows there's the sewage treatment plant and then the creeks, rivers, and streams, right? So there's aging infrastructure that's happening here. All of this infrastructure is quite old. Almost all of it is in need of repair. And so what happens is, we could talk about this later, is what's meant to be a separate sewage system, so where maybe human, feces and those kind of things, where you flush a toilet, is actually now ending up in our stormwater system at alarming rates. I mean, all the samples that we've done out in the community and that the city and county have done have shown a lot of human DNA markers in this because of what we think is sewage exfiltration. So I'll just kind of bounce it over to Lucero, I think, to kind of talk a little bit more and expand on some of these.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. I just want to talk a little bit about the impact of urbanization. We all know that urbanization creates a lot more pollution. Here on the left, we have a little overview of North County, Carlsbad area. I tried to show a little bit of that. Canyons versus the industrialized sections. But really, you see it in the water, especially after the first few rains, that we have antifreeze pollution. The stormwater has a bunch of chemicals. Even if you don't see the trash, which we all do, we see the microplastics, we also see chemicals. And that top right picture is showing that antifreeze, which is one of the visible chemicals. A lot of the times you can't see that. And as Matt brought up earlier, we do have a higher flow rate, which means that there's going to be erosions. And like that bottom right picture, it just kind of goes in and messes up our areas. So if we go on to the next slide, there's some info there. We have the industrial pollution. This was actually taken from Barrio Logan, also not in North County, but I'm sure that you all can think of some examples of something that looks like this, where it's not properly contained or treated. And when it rains, all of that just comes down into the streets and into our stormwater drains. So that's a big issue. And there's a lot of places like this that as CoastKeeper, we might be able to enforce because they're not following the Clean Water Act. But a lot of the times it's hard to find and enforce this kind of example. Going on to the next slide here, we have a good example of urbanization and the trash that finds its way into our waters. The right picture was actually taken about a week and a half ago. We went on a watershed tour, and all of that was prior to the rain that we had this weekend. So I can imagine a lot of that is making its way into our drains as we speak. This is also a good example of the fact that low-income communities are affected by this the most. They're affected by flooding issues. You see the wall right there with the house in the background. They've had issues in the past with flooding. And that's something that we really need to take into account as well. So now moving into the next slide, we do have an example of the Oceanside Loma Alta Slough. So this actually is one of San Diego's most polluted areas. The algae depletes oxygen, kills fish. With the summer heat and the sun, all of the fertilizer that comes from irrigation runoff combines in this area and grows that algae, which is very detrimental, as you can imagine, to all of the wildlife that lives in that area. Moving on to the next one, this is a good picture of San Diego, seeing that draining into the ocean, and Oceanside, where we do some cleanup events. You can just see all of the trash that was picked up from that. And especially, it's incredibly hard when you have microplastics or chemical runoff that you can't just pick up. This is a good point to bring up that with COVID, we haven't really been able to do a lot of that beach cleanup, but we are launching a cleanup challenge. So if anyone wants to go to our website after this or ask more about that, we can also talk a little bit more about that there. Our water is incredibly polluted, so much so, as Matt brought up earlier, that the fish in our area are, you have to have a guide. So you can see here from women and men, there's those guides, and this really affects some of the community here, the fishing community, that you're not even able to fish in the area because of this. And this is the bacteria issues that affect the wildlife, but as Matt said, there's also human fecal matter, which causes public health risks. So if we go on to the next slide, I actually took this from the 9th when we had that bigger rain, and every single beach in San Diego County was listed as non-swimmable. You see the warnings all around, and you know, after 72 hours after a big rain, you're not supposed to swim there. But even without rain in our dry season, we have these issues because of the stormwater drainage and the mixing in between our wastewater systems. That bottom left picture is actually South Ponto and Carlsbad, which I know a lot of you have seen. So that's really the issues that we're dealing with here. Is we want to make sure that everyone has clean access to water, and that's not what's happening with all of the pollution that we're getting. So if we go on to the next one, Southern California's polluted waterways. This is actually an interesting map here of what we call impaired waters. Based on the Porter-Clone and Clean Water Act requirement, they are required to show and update this map, but you can see most of the waterways here have issues and need cleanup plans. And as the Clean Water Act states, citizens can actually sue and enforce. So that's a part of the work that we do, and really what we really need to address as well. With the aging infrastructure, we have a lot of issues where water main breaks and just aging infrastructure in general. The next picture actually shows in Vista, California, you have this sewage contaminated water. I'm sure you can all think of some issues there. It's a really big issue public health wise, because, you know, we do not want to be swimming in that human bacteria. You also have issues with flooding, and that issue in Leucadia. You can see this, and you can see it throughout the entire county, that high flow rate. And really what we need is green infrastructure to help mitigate this kind of issue. You can see all of anything that finds its way into our roads, the trash, the coolant, irrigation. You can kind of see it there. The next one actually shows a little bit of a better aging infrastructure in downtown San Diego. It's a really big issue. We're not replacing them at the speed that we should. And right now, Matt mentioned this earlier, the speed at which these are being replaced, by the time you're done, you have to go all over again. So we really need to increase that funding and increase awareness on this issue, because it's an incredible issue that a lot of the county is facing. Now, moving away from that, San Diego County's water sources. San Diego County imports 80% of its water, which, as you can imagine, costs us quite a bit of money, quite a bit of energy, and it's not climate resilient at all. It actually uses 19% of the state's energy use. So you can imagine how that would impact the environment if we were able to recycle this water and have better water management within the county of San Diego. Another issue that comes up is our droughts. On the next picture, you see this taken from one of the most severe times, and we know with climate change, it's only going to get worse, but droughts are another issue where we're not going to be able to meet our county's needs because California just doesn't have the capacity there. So that's a big issue that we really need to start thinking about and moving forward with. And I will hand it back over to Matt for some Clean Water Act.
Yeah, thanks. So it's a good recap. I'll just kind of say, like, a lot of what we wanted to point out is first, we just always start off by talking about some of the issues that we're facing, right? We have the water quality, we have water supply issues, drought, we have climate impacts. These all things are related. They're not really compartmentalized. So we kind of talk about that. Now I want to talk a little bit about what our vision is for the future and how we get there. And that starts in somewhat mundane fashion with the Clean Water Act. So this is a law that was passed in the early 70s. It turns 50 years old in 2022, which is a really big deal. And the idea behind the Clean Water Act was to be protective, as a lot of these other sort of citizens-led sort of laws in the early 70s, the Endangered Species Act, Clean Air Act, was really to recognize that there are terrible things happening in the environment that we have been responsible for and that we want to correct for those. So the idea behind the Clean Water Act was to protect and restore the fishable, swimmable, and drinkable waters of the country. It really is a law that's pretty heavy-handed, but it also gives a lot of power to the citizenry, and that's in large way how CoastKeeper was started. It regulates water-related public and environmental health. It regulates a lot of government infrastructure, development, industry, and construction. So there's all kinds of permits and regulations. And it basically says the government has to meet these obligations, which is to protect public and environmental health around water, or it could be subject to citizen enforcement. And some of our biggest victories have been through that, but it's not the best way to approach a systemic issue. It's just sue your way through it, right? There's other opportunities and avenues. So what we do, though, is we use Clean Water Act as a regulatory driver to help us get to solutions. So let's talk about what we just talked about. You see the water supply, you see the water quality, you see flooding, you see potentially even lack of green space and urbanization, all things that are very much related to climate and very much related to water. So what we want to look is what are the kind of solutions that we want to work towards, and what we call what we're working towards. It's no small task. We're working towards really systemic change through an integrated one management approach, or what is called one water approach. And so what we recognize is that we have limited dollars in our world, and limited dollars what people are willing to pay. So why not, when we make investments, do the things that bring the greatest greatest benefits to our community in various areas, right? So address climate, address water quality, address water supply, address green space, carbon sequestration. And all of these things I put up here, multiple benefit solutions that address these things, right? Green jobs and workforce development. These are all things that didn't just come out of CoastKeeper. This is literally like on the EPA's website, right? So it's understood that the type of integrated management approaches and the type of green infrastructure, these are the expected and the known outcomes and sort of benefits to the community. So this is the type of things that we're working towards on a systemic change level, whether it's litigation, legislation, policy, local, statewide, and otherwise, is really coming up with solutions. So we'll talk a bit about what those solutions look like, because I think people are obviously interested. Okay, I love this idea. What does it mean? Well, first and foremost, we think it starts with the wise use of water. We'll talk about reuse and other things in that. But Lucero mentioned we import 80% of our water at an enormous cost, not only financial cost, but energy cost. If you think about 1/5 of our energy is towards water, if that's not green energy, it's a giant, addition to the greenhouse gas inventory. So the first thing, the platform of everything we're about to talk about moving forward is we should have a responsible, environmentally responsible use of our water. And we've worked on statewide legislation for conservation legislation. We were successful a couple of years ago in passing 2 bills that really reframed the way the state looks at water. And we'll start regulating water agencies with responsible use and conservation targets, which we think is great. And this, you'll see here, just in our service area in the county, water use has gone down, even though population is going up. So we're doing a better job, but we actually can get much better. There are still some areas of our county that are using 300-400 gallons per capita per day of water, which is fairly obscene when other countries get by, like Australia, with like 25 gallons per capita per day. So there's the use thing. See that as the background. What we're going to talk about is we obviously are always fighting for and working towards conservation solutions that take various forms. I want to talk a little bit about sort of if we are going to develop or work towards water supplies with these multiple benefit solutions, what do they look like? And so this, some of you may not know, is the Point Loma wastewater treatment plant. This is owned and operated by the city, but it actually is fed into by, I think, 13 different municipalities. When you flush the toilet or it goes down your sink or your shower, it essentially goes to this plant. It gets partially treated and then dumped into the ocean to the tune of about 180 million gallons a day. That's an enormous amount of water, right? So it's enormous. So part of the solutions we were working on was, and along with Audubon Society, San Diego Surfrider, and Coastal Environmental Rights Foundation, a few years ago, we were able to come up with a deal with the city of San Diego, a cooperative agreement that requires them to recycle up to 85 million gallons a day of this water to use for potable water. It's called the Pure Water Project. in San Diego, but there's projects taking hold in Oceanside. There's projects taking hold in East County. A Live-in-Hayne Water District is looking at this up in North County. So there's a lot of folks looking at recycled water, large-scale recycled water. And I'll just say that right now, you might ask, how much potential is there in this county of San Diego for wastewater recycling? Remember, we take all this water from hundreds, if not thousands of miles away, bring it to San Diego at enormous expense, and we use it once and dump it into the ocean. Well, along our coast in San Diego County, we have multiple treatment plants that are legally allowed to discharge up to 400 million gallons of water a day. That's enormous. It's tremendous. And so there is potential still there. And it's potential that is more environmentally conscious. It's obviously better than building other type of infrastructure that is more damaging to the environment. Here, we actually are using a socially, ethically responsible use of our water and reusing over and over again. And so what that system looks like is pretty simple, right? The water comes in and it just keeps recycling as we get it. The San Diego Pure Water Project, again, there are these taking hold in other places in our county, is stated to supply at least 33% of the city's water supply. But now with new conservation tools, we're thinking it could be up to 50%. So really an enormous potential there for that opportunity, because you have lessening demand as well. And so we'll kind of just get back. That's a large scale application of like wastewater recycling and conservation. But I want to turn a little bit more towards stormwater management, because we have these opportunities in wastewater and we have these opportunities for conservation. Well, let's look a little bit at stormwater, and then we want to talk about how we fold these things together in a truly integrated water management approach. So I'll just say, and Lucero's going to take it from here, but this slide is really meant to show when it comes to green infrastructure, right? We're looking to figure out how in the best way in the built environment to mimic this natural hydrologic cycle. So we take what's on the left, these development lands, and start, I will say, rebuilding or reinvigorating our watersheds on a watershed regional scale, local and regional, with these elements that act in similar ways. So I'll take it there, and Lucero, when you want me to keep moving on, you can just let me know.
Yeah, so now that we've given you sort of the negatives of it all, we can start talking about some of the solutions and I'll go over a little bit of the smaller scale, and Matt will do some larger scale solutions. But this is actually a good graphic of some examples of something that we can do. Just reduce that flow rate as best we can with natural processes using detention, retention, filtration. Nature is a great way to clear out those pollutants. Here in that last picture, which actually is larger on the next slide, you can see sort of that flood control and just nature-based solutions where you're restoring canyons and really utilizing the space and creating that green space, which I think we can all get behind. This is not examples from San Diego County, but definitely something that we can aspire to do. Re-landscaping is another one. You all know we have a lot of grass lawns that create overwatering. There's runoff through that, and we can really lean on our California native species to help create much more beautiful areas that are also very beneficial to stormwater and helping those issues that our county faces. Moving on to the next slide, we can also just be more creative. We can have green streets and create that green space that a lot of our communities don't have or don't have access to, and they just have multi-benefits to them. This is sort of a rendering of what a city could look like in that area. And moving on to the next one, we also have these green walkways. And when I say green walkway, I do not mean the green paint on the walls. I mean all of that beautiful landscaping that really, it's such a small thing that we can create and invest in that creates such a positive effect in our communities. On the right, you also see little divots there where the water would go in and feed those native plants in just a parking lot. It looks much more beautiful and it's benefiting us. An example of actual San Diego County is Chollas Creek. If you all have not been in that area, Chollas Creek has a lot of issues, but this is a really great infrastructure and canyon restoration that we have here. You see the rocks, the plants, and also just some information. This is a great way to bring the community out and help with all of the pollution that goes on in that area. And Choice Creek really needs, as well as most of our county, really needs more of these projects to be moving forward, because our canyons are actually, if you've seen our concrete canals, which just increase that flow rate rather than having this beautiful space where the water can move a lot slower. Another thing that Choice Creek does is these small scale green infrastructure projects. These are some cisterns that really help with saving water and capturing potential runoff, while ending up having a really good benefit for low-income communities where you can create a garden with this water. Again, multi-benefit approaches to our issues here. On that next slide, we have San Diego Green Access Map. So this kind of, again, not North County, but it's a good example of what we're talking about. A lot of the urban communities, when you see low income or communities that have been that haven't been really thought about, you see that all of these red areas mean they don't have access to green space, and this is something that we can really improve on and have those opportunities that I talked about earlier, where you can have information and community while also improving all of that water space. So I will hand it back to Matt.
Yeah, thanks, Lucero. So I think some of what we talked about is we were able to actually contribute to some of the work that Groundworks Choice Creek was doing in some of those retrofits of properties, doing cisterns and food forests. Again, the multiple benefits of reducing runoff, contributing to lower water bills because people are able to harvest their own water. And there's so many benefits that could come from that too. So a lot of what Lucero just kind of covered, some of this is more distributed opportunities that we have, not only in the urban region. I mean, we can do this throughout our county, pretty much everywhere. But I think now I want to shift a little bit to some of the large scale. This is admittedly a mixture of gray and green infrastructure, but I think it's talking about some of the more regional or larger solutions. One of the things we're showing here is just large scale green infrastructure. Some of it is on the bottom right, you see is more of like a manufactured wetlands or man-made wetlands that serves as habitat, but water flooding buffer, water quality. Certainly the wetlands are great for taking out pollutants and processing that. So there's so many different benefits plus green space. On the left, it's a park that was built, not in San Diego, but we'll talk about this. It was built to purposely flood during a rainfall. So you reduce the flooding downstream. You have additional green community space. Especially, it's okay if it's flooding because most people are not out playing in the rain. So you're looking at the multiple benefits and multiple purposes of built infrastructure, right? And that we think makes a lot of sense. And if you get back to that map we just showed previously, especially if you have areas, whether it's in North County or downtown San Diego or otherwise, it's looking at the solutions to say, well, how do we create the green space while also having, or how do we deal with the water quality while also having, or how do we deal with the flooding while also having? So it's these co-benefits and multiple benefits that we get back to. At the same time, there's a lot of opportunities for job growth in this market. And so we talk about transitioning off of maybe heavy fossil fuel industries. Water, there's a lot of studies coming out of UC Berkeley, just had a labor study that really in the water world, and there's a great study about this in LA, tremendous amount of opportunity with plumbers, pipe fitters, and community members to not only do workforce training, apprenticeships, people from the community being part of the solutions and building the solutions forward. This is one example, which is in Anaheim, so just up the street from us, that what they did here is they took it to another level. So this is a space that's an urban environment, right? They went and they dug underneath, they're building a large capture vault to capture stormwater. So now they're looking at stormwater as an asset rather than a liability. And many times we've looked at it as a liability, right? The multi-billion-dollar liability that we're facing in our region. They're saying, well, let's try and turn that into an asset. So we're going to start capturing water in these vaults. We can reuse it. It reduces flooding. And on top of this, we can build a community park if we want. So something that people can recreate in and around, but also it's serving as a multiple function opportunity. This one's happening in LA. So when I say these things, I want you to think, they're not just other places, right? This is Anaheim. This is LA. This is on the east side of LA. They're building a giant cistern. So you think about a rain barrel, but think about it in a much larger perspective. And then how we can capture this water, which has multiple benefits, and use it to some extent. This one is right here in town. And you may not know this, but this is, I think it's a 3 million gallon capture tank at the San Diego airport. So this was just completed very recently. And you can imagine you have a very highly functioning airport with a lot of industrial activity, planes taking off, leaving, think about all the pollutants that come from that. And it's right on the bay, right? And so we have this history of pollution in the bay, and the airport has historically been a contributor to that. So what they did is they said, well, what we're going to do is capture as much of that as we can on site. They built this giant vault, as you can see these folks even walking around it. You could drive trucks through this thing. And then they're going to reuse that water as part of their HVAC system. They eventually maybe want to use it into a larger wastewater recycling project. So, which brings us to the next slide, pure water. So we talked about the wastewater recycling project that plant on the coast and all the plants on the coast could potentially be doing. And we actually have an agreement with the city to do a massive 85 million gallon a day proposal. What this slide does is just say, look, sure, we're going to be doing that, but also with the things like the vault that they're doing in Anaheim, or look at the things that they're doing in LA, or look at what the airport's doing, we have an additional opportunity to even bring in these other additional water supplies and have multiple benefits. So maybe, and it's kind of difficult to see, but on the right-hand side, you see what's happening is you have a ball field, and underneath it's a giant vault. It's almost like that Anaheim picture I just showed you. They're building infrastructure underneath and then actually having recreational space on top, so that you have this opportunity to have these multiple benefit solutions and contribute to the betterment of our water. And so I'll just say that the city started diving into this, the city and others are diving into this. So it's not just the city, but I point this out because the only local tangible report we have came out of the city of San Diego in 2016, where they said by capturing urban stormwater, we potentially could supply 22% of our water supply. That's enormous, right? Now you're talking about a local supply from the sky that takes a lot less energy associated with climate change, transport, and move. But it also said by integrating our water approaches, we could save $750 million. So now you're not just talking about the benefits of the water supply, you're talking about the co-benefits of all the infrastructure and green infrastructure. But now you're also talking about enormous cost savings due to efficiencies. And so it's all the things we want to see happen. Now we'll talk a little bit about how we make that happen because of funding. So I'll pass it back over to you, Lucero.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, now that we've sort of talked about all of these great opportunities and solutions to stormwater and wastewater, we kind of ask, how are we going to pay for it and how expensive is it? And in January of 2020, in San Diego, actually, they're going to release a report saying, you have a $1 billion shortfall. The new mayor is inheriting that. And obviously, this could be scaled to the entire county and what kind of issues everyone has to deal with. But the city of San Diego is currently charging less than any other major Western city, and it is by a lot. San Diego actually charges about 95 cents for stormwater management, while other major cities are upwards of $11, $15. So that's something that, people are willing to pay for, and we haven't really moved forward on that. I saw in the chat, somebody did say water is so cheap. And that's something that we kind of need to address in terms of how we get the funding for all of these projects that are so necessary. Currently, it's out of general funds, and that's no way to move forward with that, since there are so many more important, not more important, but also as important issues that our communities face. So we really need to figure out a way to move forward on all of this. The problem is, it's regional, jurisdictional issues. And actually, before I will talk about LA, LA did something similar where they had a Measure W passed November of 2018. And we're really looking through that for inspiration in terms of how we can raise that fund. LA's Safe Clean Water program really focused on raising significant money for green infrastructure projects, clean water, and everybody really was behind that and understood the necessity for clean water. It prioritized DAC, which is disadvantaged communities. They actually have a committee that deals with that and makes sure that those communities are prioritized. And, we can learn from that and take the good things, learn from the negatives. An issue that we have that LA doesn't as much is regional and jurisdictional issues. If we want to go on to the next one. Watersheds cross boundaries, borders. We have water districts that are in multiple cities. And really that's our big issue, that we don't have a regional entity that can do that. So right now we're hopefully focusing on San Diego City, but Sandag might be another potential, and we really need community voices to weigh in on that, to push things forward and push your own cities and municipalities for that. So next slide here, water polling. The San Diego Progressive Labor Alliance, we partnered with them through a poll in March where they did ask about how people would feel about increasing that stormwater fee, and 64% in San Diego said that they would support that for clean water, green infrastructure, and water supply benefits, with 14 undecided. So that's incredibly great for us. You know, a lot of things are divide us through, you know, we saw that this year, but water is one of those issues that we can really come together so long as we really communicate with everybody and do these kinds of presentations where we get to talk about all of that.
Yeah, so thanks, Lucero. I want to kind of just stop there for just a quick second. We have a few more slides to go through, but I think this is kind of the idea behind this is we focus some of this stuff on the city because we have some data and information there, but these are really regional issues. And what Lucero talked about, these cross, you know, border, meaning cross border from the county to the city to Oceanside to Carlsbad to the city, you know, other folks, they have the same problems and the same issues in many ways. But because of the regulations, the way they manage, they are kind of looking at this in silos. And so part of the work that we're doing, and even, you know, how I get to meet Carl, is through different alliances of folks that are saying, hey, how do we figure this out on a regional level? So Lucero mentioned Sandag. You know, while the city is potentially looking to advance a ballot measure and the county is interested in looking at that, it may be a much neater fit that instead of trying to do it through Oceanside and then the county and then Carlsbad and then, you know, Chula Vista, to look at this regional approach. And we're very much doing a deep dive into that and figuring out where the best place to house this revenue action is, because we know there's an enormous shortfall in the billions. We know there's enormous need, but we also know there's enormous potential to really start to invest in these projects. So if you'll indulge, I think I'm going to stop there and shift gears a little bit, because while we're moving towards these positive solutions, we think, and we're actually making progress, and we want so many people to weigh in and be part of this conversation. So we're very grateful for having the floor for a bit tonight. There are still projects that are being proposed as early as next week that could be disastrous for our region in many, many ways. And we're talking the billions of dollars. That is the exact opposite of what we're talking about tonight. And so I want to bring up one of those things, because there are right now, very currently, opportunities for people to voice their concern or opinion on this coming up as early as next Thursday at the County Water Authority meeting. And there's something called the Regional Conveyance System. This is a proposal that has been studied, and they're voting to continue the study, that would put forth anywhere from 130 miles of tunnels, pumping stations, digging through the desert, digging through national forests, digging through state lands, and basically our backcountry to really, it's a redundant project because we already get water from this region and it's carried by the Metropolitan Water District. But the San Diego County Water Authority and the Met don't really see eye to eye. And so this County Water Authority is trying to advance one of these three projects, which we think would be disastrous for many reasons. One, just because the pure environmental impact of them on our mountains and our backcountry. But also, it's estimated that the energy increase for this conveyance would be 40% more than we currently are. So it's just moving in the wrong direction, right? If we're trying to look at climate and know that the greenhouse gas associated, what we call the water energy nexus, it's absolutely in the wrong direction, and it's a redundant thing. This is another closer look at what they're talking about, the vertical shafts, the different tunnel portals they would be pumping, power. You know, it's really a tremendous giant project. I mean, we're very honest about this. We see this as an 18th century solution to a 21st century problem. It's looking backwards and not forwards, and we just think it's headed in all the wrong direction. We were able to get a coalition of 25 environmental and social justice groups to write a letter opposing this. But anybody who wants to weigh in on this, and I just give a few facts here. Again, it is redundant. It's not a new water supply. It does not give us any new water. The cost estimate they're saying is $6 billion, which obviously will go up because this is a conservative estimate. So we're probably talking about $10 billion. Now think about if we have a multiple $billion-dollar shortfall in wastewater recycling and stormwater, this directly competes with a project like this, which we're full out calling a boondoggle and just think is absolutely in the wrong direction. Again, the 40% increase in energy demands compared to existing conveyance makes no sense. And again, there's many, many miles of tunnels through mountain state parks, 6 active fault lines this would cross. So really doesn't make any sense. To that, while the County Water Authority Board appears positioned to advance this study, phase B of the study, a lot of the member agencies, meaning the water agencies that you pay your bill to, are actually opposed to it. In fact, so much so they came up with their own independent study. And what that study said is the project is not cost effective and becomes significantly more costly than other options. It's found that it was not based on sound principles, essentially, and that it was unfounded. And so you have this weird divide right now between board members of the County Water Authority and member agency water agencies. So it is an opportunity for the public to weigh in if they want. I will say that in August, they came to the first vote and they tried to advance this. And we worked with Surfrider and some other groups to have over 500 emails submitted in opposition. That public comment was more or less dismissed by the Water Authority in a fairly condescending way. But they did actually put the vote off until November because they wanted to try and lobby more. So that November will be November 19th. I can share with Carl and Merrill, other folks who are interested in weighing in on that. There's opportunity to call in and make your voice heard. But I will just put that out there. And Lucero's going to close it up real quick. And then, of course, we have time for questions. And so, Lucero, take it away.
Yeah, well, we've given you a lot of information and we're happy to take any questions here. But I know one of the big ones is going to be, what are the next steps towards cleaner water? And really, we're doing it right now by having public conversations, making sure that people are aware of the issue and aware of the importance of investment in this integrated water management approach. We really want to work to help advance the community needs, to understand the community needs and really build public awareness, acceptance, look for opportunities where we can move forward and just make sure everybody benefits. We're going to be working with elected leaders. We're extremely happy that we had pretty positive results in the election. So we're looking to move forward on that. But really 2021 is getting started with this and hopefully having some 2022 ballot measures or issues. Will definitely keep everyone updated on that and on opportunities for you all to weigh in as well, because that's the most powerful part, is bringing the community and having them have a say. So here's our contact information. I will also put this link in the chat, but if you want more information on what we were talking about today, that One Water approach, the advocacy that we do, we have that link there, as well as we have a newsletter where we do post calls to action. And with, for example, the regional conveyance system, that's something that we would post and share and talk about. So that's all of the information there, but we are happy to take any questions.
Yeah, so thanks again, and we'll kind of stop there. Thanks again for all of you for giving this opportunity. And I know there was a lot of information, but hey, we'll take the opportunity when we have it. So I appreciate it.
This was fantastic. I'm super pumped that you guys covered a whole lot of stuff, and I'm also really glad that we recorded it, because there is a lot to take in, and this is one of those topics that maybe people will go back and try to reference and share with their friends and say, I saw this one point that I'd never heard about before, and I want to share it with you so that you understand something that nobody's talking about. So it's really important that you guys showed up. So thank you very much for your presentation. I'm going to jump into some questions here. So Michael, I'm going to go in order. So hopefully I've captured all these from the chat. Michael asked, Oceanside Reclamation Project. Can you speak to that? Do you know anything about that and what your opinions are?
So we know a little bit about some of the work they're doing on some of the reclamation. Some of it, I haven't looked at it in a bit, but they're kind of doing some water recycling projects as well. And what we were asking them is, I think it's built out in phases. I haven't actually looked at it in a bit. We try and keep track of them as much as possible, but there's a lot to go on in the water world. Realize there's like 32 independent water agencies in our region that don't even neatly overlap with different jurisdictions. I think Escondido has something like 4 different water agencies serving as it. So it's an interesting world, but we understand that they're moving forward with different types of reclamation projects. When they started planning it, one of the questions I had, because we talked to the folks and said, are there elements to further integrate things like stormwater capture in the future? In North County, it's a unique element too, that you have a benefit that you don't necessarily have in South County. North County actually enjoys larger groundwater basins, and South San Diego really doesn't have those. It's a very different geological structure. So you actually have opportunities in North County that are not available in some parts of South County. So the fact that we talked about Oceanside is, hey, you know, you have some of these stormwater issues, but you also have the wastewater issues. Could you potentially, and they do this in Orange County. Orange County has a massive wastewater reclamation project that instead of using above ground reservoirs to sort of cycle through the wastewater and treat it, they do it underground, which is actually a perfect natural system. So there's hope that in the future that Oceanside be moving that direction. Much more than that on the specifics, you know, I probably don't have it in my back pocket to throw there, but when we're looking at, I would say in general, we're looking at the water recycling projects that are advancing. We are very supportive of them. What we hope to see is that there's a difference between potable water that you can eventually drink and non-potable, or what they call purple pipe systems, which is just irrigation systems. It used to be back in the day, all of our environmental water groups, including us, were really big on promoting any kind of recycling, even though it's, you know, whether it be potable or not. As we go on, we're realizing the purple pipe system is not ideal in many ways, and it may have targeted limited usage, but in many ways, it's kind of propping up, in some degrees, wasteful water practices. So, and it's not treating it to the greatest extent that it can. And sometimes it's not used. So in the winter, you tend to see a drastic reduction of water use because of the wet season, the rainy season. So you have a lot of water being treated and then not used and still dumped. So we've turned increasingly towards advocating for potable reuse and really conservation and reduction of use on large, you know, on green space that's like, you know, lawn or ornamental things like that. So in general, we're pretty supportive of all the wastewater reclamation projects, because the alternative is dumping it out into the ocean, barely treated, and it's just not a viable solution. Like I said, we have about 400 million gallons a day being dumped into the ocean in San Diego County alone.
Okay, thank you. Laura asked, what is the best way individuals and organizations can support CoastKeeper's work? And I guess one thing I'd point out is, you mentioned Sandag, and you guys might not be ready to ask people to go bombard Sandag, but you're getting close, right? Coming up with strategies for how to work with Sandag.
So there's ongoing conversation right now. Our strategy is, especially when it comes to the city of San Diego, there's like immediate needs. I think long term, no, we're not. I don't think it's important for people to bombard Sandag. There's still those of us, you know, Carl and our coalitions, the Green New Deal Alliance, and some of these other quality of life coalitions, really making sure that we have our ducks in a row when we approach the agencies and lay the groundwork for these kind of things, the conversations. But there are opportunities definitely when a concerted public voice is very, very helpful, right? It's so on opportunities like this regional conveyance system, whether it's, you know, we don't want to be always the people who are saying no to something. We want to be the people who are saying yes to something and advancing something, the things that we really want to see. And so if we're going to show up in concert for the things we hate, we really should be showing up in concert for the directions that we want to see and we like too, right? And so that's partly what we're trying to galvanize people to, like, be excited about these opportunities and the solutions and really work in concert towards advancing them. So I think short term, right, the bombarding of Sandag, they got a lot on their plate with the transportation. We're trying to feel out their appetite. But but they, you know, we've been approached by them and other folks that we're talking to. And so, but I think in the short term, just even making sure this is on your radars, and Carl said, just kind of through your conversations, oh, I heard about this, let me sort of advance that. And then, you know, now we're going through educating electeds and newly electeds as to these topics, right, in these conversations, because there's a lot to catch up on. You know, a lot of this stuff is kind of in the weeds. People aren't paying attention to it every day. So I think it's even just continuing the narrative in your networks and your cycles. And Laura, I appreciate the opportunity to answer that question. It's a perfect setup to say, hey, donate to CoastKeeper. I won't do that, but donate any one of your local, to donate either your time, your energy, your efforts to, like you all are tonight, to being educated on the subject matter and then advancing that, right? Letting that ball keep rolling. So it's not, so it doesn't stop tonight, so that you're thinking about water issues, thinking about the holistic management of them and how to advance that in your conversation. So maybe you're the typical kind of person who goes into a meeting with a council member or a decision maker, or even just the community, and saying, I'm generally about talking about this thing, but all of a sudden, like, oh, but I know water touches anything and everything in our community. So how do I make that part of the narrative in the conversation going forward? I think that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you, Laura, for that setup. But really right now, it's just about, you know, chatting with your neighbors, finding some other maybe opportunities for us to come and speak. And we promise we'll make them shorter if needed. But really, we just want to make sure that everyone has this on their radar, signs up for our newsletter. If that's something that you're interested in doing, is helping with just the advocacy and showing up for those public comment kind of meetings where we can give you some talking points and you can put your own spin on why it's important to you and your community. That's really, it goes a long way.
Thank you. And I guess this is an important time to remind everybody too. Matt introduced himself as he's a lawyer. And so one of the things CoastKeepers is doing is making sure that if people are breaking the rules and the laws and we need to work, to stop that, that's a big part of what CoastKeepers is about, is understanding that law and knowing how to check it. So that's awesome. Emilio asked, water is too cheap, but it is also absolutely needed. What are your thoughts on using tiered pricing to stimulate conservation? And so if we use less water, then less water ends up in the sewer. So make the lower tiered reasonable and then makes the higher tiered more expensive to cause some pain.
It's a wonderful question. We completely agree. The problem why it's not structured that way is because, and it's unfortunate, in the past there's been quite a few what we would consider poor management water decisions that we're still left paying for. And so there's something called fixed costs and variable costs. So that when you either build a water project or have to continually maintain a water project, there's some built level of, or some fixed level of cost that you're always going to have. And so what happens is the water agencies benefit by making those fixed costs fairly high, so they always have that income and not variable. So it's this weird thing. We all want to see conservation happen, but the way the water agencies operate is by selling water to the end user, the customer, right? And so it's not a perfect system. And so there's really not an incentive necessarily on behalf of the water agencies to want that conservation or to come up with tiered rates. I will tell you that 2 years ago, when we were fighting for the statewide legislation to fix conservation targets into the statewide, when the governor after post-drought, he said, we're going to make conservation a way of life. So there's two bills we worked on. Both went through the House and the Senate, and we got them passed. And one of the biggest opponents of those was the San Diego County Water Authority, because they had done investments in like desalination, which is very, very expensive water supply with a single benefit. Those are fixed costs. That's going to exist. They also took a contract that said with desalination, no matter how much water it provides, we're going to pay for it whether we need it or not. And so it's called a take or pay contract. So we would say that some of those decisions were not very well based and not really well informed, but we're left paying for them. And so there's only so much variability that people are building into tiered rates. We've done some workshops on tiered rates and those things. I completely agree. It's a great question. And if there's what we found is there's also some level of folks in this county that have enough money that no matter how high you price it, they're just going to keep using it to the greatest extent they want. The problem with that too is then it creates a false demand. And then water agencies, well, look, we're using it, so we have to keep building up to that too, right? So it's a really complicated, we won't be able to crack that nut tonight. We absolutely support tiered rates, but in implementing it, it's a whole lot harder to actually get done because of the fixed versus variable rate structure. And I will tell you that more and more agencies are moving more towards the fixed rate structure than variable. So it's actually kind of moving in the opposite direction that we'd like to see. And that's where making sure that people who are on the boards, one of the biggest things is the down ballot votes. Most people never even make it to the water board votes that they have, but those are really important votes, is to get to know those people who are serving on the water boards, because they are going to be the ones who could end up, the different authorities or the folks that you pay your water bill. Those are going to be the folks that are making the decisions in the end on how our water infrastructure is built and how much we're spending on it.
Matt, it's really interesting to hear that answer, because what you made me just think of was the power company. And the power company has this tiered system, and they make it look like in their billing and all of their little addendums that they want you to try to save energy. But the truth is the power company is a profit-based system that needs you to use as much electricity as possible. So they're put in this weird position where they're being asked to pretend to ask you to conserve, but in reality, they don't want that to happen. But I think what you're saying is even municipal systems that are not necessarily investor-based and profit-based, they still can fall into that trap sometimes where they've got these fixed costs. So they're stuck really not advocating for what they know they want, but they've got these fixed costs and they can't make everybody save water and then, end up not having their costs covered.
That's exactly right, caller. And I'll just say, like, there's something it's water and energy are actually very related in many ways. Something in the energy field called the loading order. And the idea is before you do new investments, you realize, where you can actually have conservation or other capacity efficiency in your existing structure. We've for years advocated on that on the water side. Let's see where we can get to conservation before developing out new supplies, even if they're the supplies we like, the recycling, the capture. And it's been met with great hostility, honestly, in many ways, where just even in our region here, that people said, we just don't want any part of that. But it just makes intuitive sense. It just makes perfect sense. But again, there's the economic driver of this. And you kind of encapsulate right. There's a lot of sort of, the idea that water and energy are inextricably linked and very similar systems.
Okay, let's move on to some more questions here. Chelsea asks, what are the major opportunities to improve water quality in San Diego County?
Yeah, God, there's so many, but yeah, it's big because it kind of depends on what the pollutant source is. So in North County, I will say, besides the urbanization, which is definitely a problem, you see a lot of nutrient pollution. And so that comes from, ag or ag-related businesses, but it also comes from over-fertilization and runoff. So you saw the slide that Lucero had up there with Loma Alta Slough. There tends to be, nutrient pollution is a hard thing throughout our whole entire county, but it really in North County, we're seeing a lot of nutrient pollution. So it could be everything from making sure our government is accountable to actually when ag-related business or industry is using different products or, there's whole parts of North County, you see that there's like ag-related business or even, animal feeding operations, different kinds of farms. That is certainly an issue. And so how do you do that? It's partly, education, and it's partly just making sure the government's doing its job because it is supposed to regulate and control that. A lot of it's community education and outreach, but again, it comes back to there is some level of, and we could do things like change laws, like eventually, like copper has always been a problem for marine and aquatic environments. So in California, we're slowly moving towards non-copper brakes, right? So through Caltrans and a lot of our infrastructure and our transportation, there's a lot of, quite honestly, pollutants that come from that, right? You could do things like technological and say, well, let's use non-copper brakes, which would be a huge part of the solution. We look at, so it's kind of an all of the above. It's also part of this green infrastructure solution, right? How do we take our built environment and put in areas that we're now treating the water as it runs through, we're using natural mimicking of this cycle. And all those things cost money, right? Because we're not going to reverse our urbanization in many ways, but we have to figure out within that built environment, how do we put in these opportunities to address, and maybe one answer is, well, let's capture a bunch of it, right? It's transporting pollutants and it's running off. You can't capture it all because you actually need, you need some level of water for nature. We know that. We're not saying capture all the stormwater. That's crazy. You need rivers and streams, you need wetlands, these things. But we're saying there are strategic opportunities to do that through this green infrastructure approach. And I think a lot of what we walked through tonight, we see as some of the major opportunities to addressing the water quality problems. But yeah, it's a bit of education. It could be everything from street sweeping to educating people to not, overwater their lawns with nutrients, to not do certain practices. Trash abatement. There's trash everywhere. That's a problem too. So, and it's a lot of what we've done in the last 25 years, which is why we took that multifaceted approach: the education, the science, the outreach. We do a lot of scientific study, but then the pushing for policy, pushing for legislation, and pushing for enforcement if we have to get people there. It's a great question. It's what we ask ourselves every day.
Did you say copper brakes or bricks?
Brakes on cars. So a lot of car brakes are utilize copper, but as brakes degrade, that goes out into the environment. So and that really is very, very damaging to the natural environment.
Okay, cool. Because I was going to tell everybody to stop using those red bricks.
Yeah, no, we're good.
All right. Maybe EVs with their regenerative brakes will cut down a lot of that brake dust. So yeah, that could be a good thing. Mulika asked, help me understand, what is the stormwater fee for? Because the stormwater fee was mentioned. Is that an existing fee? So yeah, there is some level of stormwater fee. Right now, I'll use the city as an example, but all cities in our region have it. City of San Diego as an example, because it's kind of notorious throughout the entire Western United States. It's a fee on your water bill
Those two things are not really related because your water use and stormwater are not necessarily related. It's a fee on a water bill primarily that is used to pay for things like maintenance of stormwater pipes. So all the infrastructure you don't see under your feet, right? If you're driving and you see, anytime you say drains to, you're driving on a street and you see a gutter, underneath you is an enormous infrastructure that is carrying water, and its main purpose is to stop flooding from happening, right? It was designed not to treat water or anything like that. It was designed to keep you safe from heavy rainfalls that inundate you and could drown people. So what it does is that all of that underground infrastructure, it's meant to support that. And that's throughout the county. It's culverts, it's levees, it's all these things that are built to try and be flood management. What was built as a flood management project, essentially, really did not pay attention to, though, the detriment of water quality by just trying to move that water as fast as possible, right? And so what we're hoping is that rather than just keep propping up that what we call gray infrastructure, that underground pipe infrastructure, let's figure out ways to green that infrastructure above ground and turn it into an asset for people, turn it into the things that are meant to address the pollution, make them benefits in green space, carbon sequestration, habitat connectivity, all the things that I think most of us want to see happen. And so the fee is essentially for that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Craig asked, sewage discharge is about 300 million gallons per day. Why not capture that and reuse it as potable water?
Exactly. Why not? And so we have our agreement with the city that I said we'll require them by 2035 to capture 85 million gallons a day. On top of that, you still have multiple hundreds of millions of gallons throughout the county. So things like the Oceanside Reclamation, you have other groups are looking at Encino wastewater, taking that to Encino wastewater plant, taking that to recharge for potable use. So that's exactly what we're advocating for and have been successful in doing. There's a Padre Dam water district. It's called the East County Project that is moving towards that. So that's exactly the type of solutions we're talking about, right? Let's do this. Let's stop discharging to the ocean. It's incredibly wasteful and damaging to our coast. Reuse that water. And then if there are elements to bring in this stormwater capture into that recycling, all the better, right? Because now we're looking at water supply benefits. We're big on taking liabilities and turning them to assets. Right now we look at wastewater discharge as a liability and stormwater pollution as a liability. But how do we flip that on its head and look at the opportunities and the assets? Because water is precious and we're in a place where not much of it is local. So let's figure out when we get it here, how to turn it into an asset. When it falls from the sky, how to turn it into an asset. And there are absolutely opportunities to do it. It's just going to cost some money, but so did desal. So was this crazy tunnel project in the tens of $6 billion. We choose to live in a place that doesn't rain much. It's sunny. It's really beautiful, but there are repercussions to that, right? And so we have to figure out the give and take there. And so make the best of what we do. And when we import it, great question, and that's what we're working towards. It's a big part of our initiatives, the recycle water, stormwater capture, and what we call these one water solutions.
Okay, sort of as a follow-up, I saw a recent documentary, and in that they were trying to spotlight some situations where they were capturing wastewater and turning that into energy. Do you think that that's kind of cray-cray, or is it legit?
No, so in San Diego alone, our county, they didn't necessarily turn the water into jet energy, but what happens when you filter out all the waste and wastewater, they actually use that as fuel. So the Point Loma wastewater treatment plant is 100% self-sufficient. And what we're talking about with the pure water system, and we've had lawsuits against the Miramar landfill for various things, but landfills, we hate landfills, but the ones that exist create a lot of gas. And so what you can do is potentially have a co-generating plant where for the pure water system in the city, you might be able to use some of the gas that's naturally comes about from the landfill. So there are people who actually use the waste in the wastewater stream. Some of it is shipped actually to Arizona as fertilizer because you can actually, once you kind of treat it enough, you can use it as fertilizer for different crops. And some of it can be used for energy. So there is actually benefit and potential there too. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
It's the idea that if you try and look at what we considered waste, I don't even like the word wastewater. Let's look at the things we used to consider as waste and how are we treating them as assets? And actually, because there is no such thing as waste. You can't, nothing goes away like that, right?
Yeah, and we got to get over ourselves about stuff is icky, and that's not easy and efficient. Like efficiency is really about dialing into these details and making sure that we're handling our crap, literally.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay. Let's see. Andrea asks, what is the existing MWA source of this water?
Yeah, great question. About 80% of that, maybe 70%, is from the Colorado River. And so if you know anything about the Colorado, and the rest is from what's called the State Water Project, which is water that's received up from the Sacramento area, the Delta up there. But the vast majority of our water actually comes from agreements that we've worked out on the Colorado River. Those are fairly secure rights. The issue with them is that goes way back to water history in the West. The Colorado River from day one was over allocated. And so basically it tried to portion out how much Utah gets, how much Colorado gets, how much Arizona and California and Nevada. It did so, but it did so based on the previous few years, which were very, very wet years. And now we're seeing that was a disastrous way to set up water. And so, you know, some folks have adapted. I think in Vegas, right, you're not allowed to build a new building with a grass lawn because they understand, look, we just don't, you know, the Colorado River is over allocated. You have the reservoirs, you know, the giant reservoirs and dams that were built along Colorado. Every year we're getting more and more news with climate change that they're getting disastrously low to, you know, according to their historic limits, where we actually have to portion out and limit people's use of water on an entire Southwest scale. And with climate change coming, you're seeing more of these, what they call atmospheric rivers, really heavy drenching rainfalls that will flood us and ruin us. And then long periods of in between, right? And then with less snowpack, it used to be in California and Colorado, you had the snowpack was sort of like a natural reservoir. It held it to a certain part of the year. And then as it melted, our water supply came all at once. Well, as it rains now instead of snows because of global warming, you now have a situation where that natural snowpack isn't being helped. And now you don't have the water available when you used to because it's all run off instead of actually making its way slowly through the system. Incredible challenges all at once. But yeah, I guess every answer I have is long-winded because it's all complex. But the mass majority is the Colorado River, which is not a very stable long-term source for anyone in the Southwest, quite honestly.
We like long answers, Matt. Those are
great.
Those are good. Yeah.
I don't know how much time we had even tonight. I forget how long you scheduled this to. So
we're good. I mean, we've gone as long as 2 hours. So
we're going to try not to do that. But
yeah.
Gotcha.
I should have reminded you to eat before this, man.
Yeah, no, I'm good.
So let's see. Next question is from Cynthia. Is San Diego County Water Authority controlled by the Board of Supervisors?
It is not. So County Water Authority Board is its own board that is has various elements to it. There's actually a good partner group of ours called the Center on Policy Initiatives, just like a week or two ago, released a report on exactly who the makeup of the County Water Authority Board is, so that people start getting educated. These are folks who make the decisions for billions of dollars of water infrastructure in our region, and no one knows who they are. We're probably the only group that watchdogs them and really pays attention and pays attention to what their decisions are. We've had sued them in the past when we thought it was necessary. What happens is each one of the water agencies that services a different region, and again, there are like 32 water agencies in our region, either appoints or elects folks to this County Water Authority Board. And so if you go on their website, there's many, many board members. It's an enormously sized board. It's just incredible the amount of people on it. For instance, the city of San Diego elects 10 people to the board. For Carlsbad, there's like 2 people. It's kind of proportionate. Some, I don't want to say it's like a sandbag thing because I don't want to equate those 2 entities. But it is, so what happens though, is, and the county does appoint some folks to, or different water agencies. What happens is there's not necessarily a connection between the people leading the water agency and even their appointed board member. And I'll give an example. Just this thing that's coming up next Thursday, this regional conveyance system vote. I know that the city of San Diego's, the head of the public utilities department, which is the water department for the city of San Diego, is opposed to the project. However, I could definitely see a scenario where the city's 10 representatives vote for it because there's just a disconnect. I know that the Livenhain Water District is opposed to this. They just today mailed in a letter with 8 or 9 North County groups, water agencies saying we are opposed to this. And yet I could see the votes going through because there is a disconnect. There's, quite honestly, in my personal opinion, there's a lack of accountability because no one does watch who they are, what's going on. And so the decisions are not necessarily made with the public's best interest. It's made in the best interest of a few. And so, yeah, it's a great question, but I would just say that if you folks want to look at the Center on Policy Initiatives website, and I can even maybe put that link on, they have a really good, they don't talk about anything other than the facts of who serves on this and who they are and what they do. And I'll kind of put that up on here.
Do you think in terms of that boondoggle, that's just misinformed board members, or do they have an alternate reason for wanting to push that through?
It's a great question. Some of it, I don't want to say it's misinformed. I think there's a culture at the County Water Authority where decisions get made in a way, how do I say this diplomatically? I don't know even how to answer that question without sounding undiplomatic, and maybe this is an okay forum for that. But I think that sometimes decisions get made at the interest of a few over the interest of the many, and that it doesn't necessarily take an unbiased or independent person on the board. Again, they don't necessarily represent even the water agency that they're asked to represent, and so that's a concern of ours, that there are other interests at play. And I have called them out on this at the last public meeting. I asked them, who are you accountable to? Because there seems to be an enormous lack of accountability through that agency, quite honestly.
And sometimes there's massive momentum on projects like this, where it's the people that are board members and looking around and they're being told like, no, just go along with it.
Yes.
They don't feel like they should be the champions to stand up and stop the momentum of a big project that's been talked about and planned for a long time.
Correct. I think that's true, but we're starting to see a rift. And like I said, this is the first time in a while I saw at the County Water Authority a concerted vocal agency opposition within there. And so it's caused a lot of discomfort within that agency, which I think is okay, right? Because that's how agencies should operate. There should be free thought and free expression and discussion about the multiple $1 billion in our region that are going to be spent on water in general. Yeah, great question.
Let's see. We're almost through the questions that our folks have set for you, but I've got some for myself. So I'm going to keep you guys around if you can.
Yeah, I mean, I could probably do another 10 minutes if that's okay.
Okay, yeah. So let's see. This is a good one. This is actually kind of in line with something I was going to ask. So could you review the greenhouse gas cost per gallon of water? Maybe not per gallon, but like you mentioned 19% of our energy use comes from our water. Can you give a little more detail about why that is?
I can give a detail why. I can't do it by gallon of water. There's probably many factors that go into that. However, there was a study that came out of USD EPIC school. It's the USD law school, a group called EPIC, that actually did they did a study a few years ago, and Carl, I can share that if other people are interested, that talked about the energy intensity of water use within our county in different cities by city. So what happens is, because think about where we get our water, especially in San Diego. We know that 80% of it or more is not from San Diego, which means it has to come from somewhere else. Whether it's the Colorado River or Northern California, or maybe it's desalination, or maybe it's wastewater recycling, there's obviously energy intensity along with that. They use gravity as much as they can through the systems. But if you're getting water from the Northern California, it's literally pumped over the Tehachapi Mountains down to us. Pumping enough water to feed Los Angeles, Orange County, and San Diego, you can imagine, is an enormous amount of energy, right? And so all of the energy associated with that, traditionally it's not green energy, right? I mean, it's fossil fuel energy. And so just that in alone is in and of itself is huge. Desalination is actually the highest energy consumption water supply that exists anywhere. So that is tremendously, exhaustive of energy as well. And then, so they say that 19-20% is associated with the transport, the treatment, even the heating. So as people want hot water. We're not all taking cold baths or this or that next thing. So just even at the end user, where we're talking about how much it costs through energy for natural gas or electricity to heat that water, it's going to cost something, right? And so that's why all of those things together, it was this, I think it was the Public Utilities Commission that put the report out. Don't misquote me on that, but a group like that, I think it was the California Public Utilities Commission that said, we estimate that 19% of California's water, there you go, cool. 19% of the water is actually associated with the transport, treatment, and use of water, of energy with water, which should be hugely eye-opening, because any of us who care about climate change, and we do, and we know that energy use is inextricably linked with that. Well, how do we reduce our use or transform it? Well, we got to figure out a lot of the water element too. If someone said to you, overnight we can figure out 15%, 20% of our energy, dynamic in California, be like, great, how do we do it? Well, a big portion of that would be water, right? So, so I think that's kind of, it's as probably as fine-tuned as I can get, but there was that EPIC study that I could share if people really want to dig into by municipality, which water supply is the most energy intense.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Lucero, I know you're kind of new at the job, but are there things that we can do after watching this tonight that will make your job easier for your outreach? Like, what can we do to help make sure that CoastKeeper is kind of on everyone's radar?
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate it. If anyone has any other groups that they would like to share information with or have us come to, please do that. Email me if you want just updates or signing up for our newsletter. I saw Cynthia Wooten asked about the Thursday meeting, and I did share that PDF where you can email comments, or it has the information on how to submit public comment for that one. But really, our newsletter is the best way to do that so that we can communicate when there are things. We don't expect you all to go through board agendas and keep track of all of the water issues because that's our job, but we can communicate that with you all and make sure that you're there.
Maybe the beach cleanups are a way that we stay in touch with CoastKeeper and don't forget about the work that you're doing, so that, you know, like we're seeing the beach cleanups and then you guys are reminding us about, hey, we need you to talk at this meeting. You know, like that's kind of a nice way that you guys can stay in touch with people and keep them engaged too.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something that, you know, our newsletters are usually about the cleanups, and because of COVID, we haven't been able to have those massive cleanups where we all get to meet up. But next week, we're actually launching what we call a 6 cleanup challenge, where you can sign up and say, hey, I'm gonna sign up for 6 cleanups throughout the county. I actually did one down in Encinitas the other day, and I can tell you, you will find trash. You will find a lot of microplastics. So that's definitely a great way to just help out. But really, we do also want to advocate and make sure that you guys can show up for that advocacy side, which not a lot of people do. Some people just like to do the cleanups, but we are really hoping that we can have that mobilization team.
And Carl, we won't let you forget about us. Don't worry about that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Now that you open the door, we're here.
Anybody that's ever spent any time picking up other people's trash in a public space will never ever pollute again. You know, like that's something that every child should be asked to do from a very early age. And I think that really instills in us, like, I don't want to do this. Why am I doing this? And you're thinking of the other people that did this, that made this pollution. And you're like, I bet they wouldn't do this either if they had to try to pick this up for a few minutes. It would just change everyone's mind.
And I think one of the biggest reasons we've done beach cleanups for the longest time, not because we think we could pick up the hundreds of millions of pounds of trash that are in the environment, it's making people have that connection that you just talked about, right? People like to be at the beach. Sometimes they want to be civically engaged, but then saying, oh yeah, this ends up here. How did this end up here? Well, that could have been mine at one point, right? Or something that I contributed to. And then that fuels future, you know, work and advocates and folks who now have that connection they want to. So it's important for both facets, but sometimes we say, like, that's the introduction sometimes to environmentalism could be something as simple as that. I think that everyone should have to beach cleanup, and everyone should have to tour a landfill, because when you see that what goes on there, it's actually just mind-boggling, right? To understand what we're doing. So yeah, it's a great point, Carl.
All right, Matt, I didn't want you to let you get away without finishing this sentence for me, because I thought this was kind of a great catch line. I'm going to start this sentence and you finish it. Solar panels on every roof and...
Yeah, cisterns in every yard, right?
Cisterns in every yard. That's genius, because honestly, I've been seeing these tiny ass little rain barrels underneath people's, downspouts. And I think that's awesome for like 3 days worth of watering or whatever. But if we get serious about this, we can make cisterns a reality. We can make it so that everybody understands that's a responsibility, that we have to put these, we don't have to make it everyone's personal problem to go invest in one. We can do this as a big project too, right?
Yeah, and I would say that part of what we talk about in the solutions, these dispersed solutions that are distributed that Lucero talked about, is yes, we could actually incentivize through different kind of partnerships where the city, I could envision the city of Oceanside, the city of Carlsbad, others saying, hey, we're going to actually, because it's our legal obligation to protect our waters and flood, and instead of dealing with the problems with that, we're going to incentivize you and community and construction and commercial operations, industrial operations. And we do this sometimes with industrial through our litigation, is say, you have to build a capture system on your property and then reuse it. So it's incredible. We work with some of our partner groups. There's one called H2 Home and some other groups who actually are putting in like pretty massive capture systems in people's yards, and you'd never know they were there. They just kind of blend. The technology's come a long way. Some people put them underground, but a lot of times they're just along the side of a house or something like that, maybe on the roof of an apartment. There's more and more of these opportunities coming around that we say, yes, like we're firm believers in solar in every house and cisterns in every property that can maintain it, because it really is part of the distributed solution to the issue that we're having. And I just think it's a way that, you know, we can look at the pairing of water and energy and how those things. And there's a lot of folks who want to do that. Like, yeah, like the rain barrel that lasts a little bit, but we have the opportunity to really, I know people who capture enough rain for the entire garden through the summer on their property, and you'd walk into their property and you'd never know that there's this thing that's doing that. So it could be impressive.
It's the future. We just have to assume that it's the future. Like, we make it the future because we know that's what it's got to be.
That's what we're doing, one step at a time. We're going to get there. I'm confident.
Yeah, I'm glad.
But we need all of us to do it.
Yes. So we will try to follow up with your messaging about the boondoggle and how, because I would love for all of our members to consider getting engaged for, you know, if you haven't been doing that, this might be a good opportunity for you to give it a try, because this is affecting everybody in the county, really. And so this is something that, you know, we could step up and make our voices heard, and, you know, exercise those civic engagement muscles of yours, because we do have a new county board of supervisors. We've got new folks at the San Diego Council. We've got new folks all over the county in elected positions, and we need to show them that we are coming at them with lots of demands about, you know, making change around here. So definitely follow up with us with that, and we'll make sure that when Merrill and Marion send stuff out and when we put it up in social media, that we've got places for people to engage.
Yeah, thank you. I cannot just be, I mean, I think I could speak on all of us CoastKeepers of Carl. We met and started talking about some of the works that we're jointly, you know, working on. Believe it, I super greatly appreciate all of your time. And there's a lot of things tugging at us in different directions, but the fact that you're able to kind of sit through, you're engaged and listen to the work that we're doing, and we hope to have you in the fold and working together. Just super appreciative. So thank you everybody that's kind of on here tonight and others. And looking forward to just keep working with you all. It's great when we see what a movement and momentum could do in the direction we're moving in. It just gives us a whole lot of hope. And I think, you know, especially now, we have more reason for hope now than we did even just a couple of weeks ago. So I'm grateful for you all and appreciate you.
I think this one's going to go up on one of our, you know, all-time hits in respect of, like, this is new information for a lot of people. So I hope that all of you share this out when we send the link out, because if this is new information to you, I can guarantee it's new information to your friends and family who don't know about it. It's the same problem in their areas all up and down California. Yeah. So great information tonight, Lucero. Matt, thank you so much for being with us tonight, and we really appreciate you guys coming. We really appreciate everybody in the group coming. If you want to unmute yourselves, we can all say goodbye, and we will send out a follow-up so that folks have this to share with others.
Thank you.
Great.
Oh, wait, one more thing. I forgot. I almost forgot here. We have trees. So I'm going to share my screen. Can you guys see that?
Yeah.
Okay,
yes.
This is a tree from Matt. This is in, Marion, speak up for me, please, because I'll mess it up. And this is really something that Marion does.
Oh, well, it's from our group to our speakers, because we greatly appreciate it.
He said yes, but then he changed his mind.
We didn't figure you wanted to talk about or anything, so we buy these trees in honor of our speakers, and they are planted in areas that have been burned by the wildfires. So you'll have one, and both of you have one, and you can actually go online and look up and find out where your particular tree was planted. So just a token of our appreciation. Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, well, thank you. Lucero, we're going to have to make a point of going out to the trees. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And it's nice to sort of make new friends and make new allies. So we really appreciate all the time that you spent today. I know it's Thursday night and afternoon, and, you know, we've all had work, but we really appreciate it all.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Okay, everybody unmute yourselves and say goodbye. And thank you very much, everyone.
Bye.
We'll
Bye. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Good night.
see you at our Saturday
Thank
meeting.
you,
Or
everyone.
we'll see you next month.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.